Thank you, Dr. P. And let me just say, I want to applaud and acknowledge your leadership. When I first met you, and we had very many stimulating conversations about the challenges of our day, one of the things that I thought about you is you're not just a thinker, you're a doer, and today's conference really exemplifies that leadership. And yes, we all did come out on this snowy day. I'm a little surprised the government's closed, quite frankly, but I just hope they're open on Thursday, because the Council on Competitiveness is having our big Energy and Manufacturing Summit at the Reagan Center, and I know I would be very worried if my keynote speakers didn't show up. I would be here no matter what, Dr. P. What I'm going to do is talk a little bit about some of the trends and drivers in the global economy, and then obviously with the theme of today, bring this back to the whole challenges of higher education, and just some thoughts then about the transition that we're facing, and the tremendous opportunities as well. Let me just start by saying, as Dr. P mentioned, the Council on Competitiveness is a organization now almost 20 years in existence that was formed at a time when we were very concerned about our technological competition with Japan, and the reality that many of our high technology industries were losing their global market share. And the vision was, and it's still very relevant today, how could we bring together leaders across all sectors of our economy, industry, academia, labor, and now national labs, that would step above their own particular agendas to really ask some profound questions. How do we drive our productivity, which of course is linked to growth and prosperity? What do we need to do as a nation to ensure that all Americans have a rising standard of living? And three, what do we need to do both from the public policy perspective, but very importantly, marshaling these three sectors to create an action agenda for U.S. success in the global economy. So that mission, after some 20 years, is still very powerful. The issues have changed, but the end result is really the same: prosperity and standard of living for our citizens and global growth. We certainly, and Dr. P highlighted this so beautifully in his opening remarks, global prosperity is not a zero-sum game. For everyone to rise is really for a very dynamic economy going forward. Well, we know that workers around the world are caught up in a very turbulent economy, and it is obviously not just transformed by globalization, it's being led by that. And the changes in economic drivers and the rapid advance of digital technology has been a main component of that. We really are between two ages. We've moved, I think, beyond the so-called knowledge economy into the conceptual economy. But and I'll talk a little bit about that, but it's not just the digital revolution and its impacts that have had a profound impact. It's also the fact that we're living right now in a time in human history with the greatest profound scientific revolutions underway. It's the digital revolution, the genetic revolution, the atomic revolution, and I would add the cognitive revolution. So our world is being rewritten in digital, genetic, atomic, and neural code. This is going to shape every job, every activity, have huge political, national security implications. And so it's a time of great promise and opportunity, but it's a time also of concern as you navigate between two worlds. Up and down the career ladder and across the workforce landscape, these megatrends are affecting labor markets, job opportunities, what people do on the job, and the skills they need to compete and succeed. So this tsunami of change has brought new economic opportunities. Let's just think about it. Think of global poverty reduction. It has been profound, and we've seen rising standards of living brought to hundreds of millions of people around the world, with projections that by 2030, 80% of the world, if we do things in a good way, and we can talk about that, are increasingly going to merge into middle-class citizens. But these changes have brought hardship to others. Many Americans, and we're talking about our country particularly today, but in a global context, many Americans are facing such severe competitive realities because they lack the level of education and skills that allow them to thrive in this economy. We're seeing greater income inequality, a persistent rate of high unemployment, and of course you all know the official figures mask the fact that so many people have actually dropped out of the job market. And I think, this is my own view, and I'm thinking more and more about how to articulate this, a lot of the polarization we're seeing in our political process, of course the most recent sad example being the shutdown of our government, is, I believe, because of the tsunami of transitioning between these two worlds of a 20th century mass production system and moving into this higher level of conceptual, knowledge-based economy. Political instability and political unrest and a lack of political consensus will only grow more and more strong if we do not develop systems to ensure that the majority and all of our Americans have educational opportunities to enable them to compete and prosper. Educational attainment has always had an impact on employability. And again, our recent economic crisis has just strengthened this. Between 2008 and 2011, the unemployment gap between those with low levels of education and those with high levels widened across every age group, every demographic. The unemployment rate for the low educated population increased by almost 3.8%, while it increased by only 1.5% for the highly educated. Globalization, technology revolutions, and disruptive innovation are shaping the demand for knowledge and skills capacity in critically important new ways. Now, in the advanced nation, these primary economic drivers have evolved from, as we know, a prosperity driven by agriculture and mineral extraction a century ago to the 20th century economy driven by the machinery and capital of mass production. I was just in Dearborn last Monday for, and I'm going to mention this, one of our Council on Competitiveness dinners around our National Engineering Forum, hosted by the presidents of University of Michigan and Michigan State. And when you think of Detroit, and we're reading about it in the papers every day, their bankruptcy, the loss of population, all of those issues, just turn back and remember, and I can remember as a child growing up in Akron, Ohio, this part of the world was the epicenter for the industrial might of the world. It powered tremendous growth and change. You know, I don't know how many of you have had the opportunity in your lives to go visit Normandy and the D-Day invasion sites. I had the opportunity this summer, and learning about the creation of the artificial harbor and the trucks and the cars and everything that came, all of that came from the powerhouse of Detroit. And look at Detroit today. It's going to be a very interesting laboratory of policy and public-private sector partnerships to see if 10 years from now Detroit has transformed itself. But in today's 21st century economy, innovation is driving growth and productivity, and it's intellectual capital that becomes the most important resource for production and prosperity. So here's an interesting data point. 35 years ago, about 80% of the market value of the S&P 500 was represented by tangible assets, brick, mortar, equipment, and inventory. Today, about 80% of the value is represented by intangible assets, patents, trademarks, brands, research, software, and relationships. Increasingly, competitive and market success depends on people working and creating value with these intangible, idea-based assets and the technologies and management systems used to create impactful new products and services that command a premium in global markets. So this shift in economic drivers has placed a premium on workers who possess the high skills, the knowledge, the know-how, the creativity, and I would add the imagination that drives service and product innovation, and who can perform complex work that is not static but is ever-changing. As we move from a brute force to a brain force economy, the markets for intellectual capital are growing. Employers are not just looking regionally, nationally, they are going global for top talent, top project teams, top locations for talent for their business investment, and competing for who's going to perform the high-value work all over the world. Now, this shift in economic drivers is even more pronounced in the developed world, but it's nonetheless a long-term path for the global economy's evolution. And let's again think so positively the tremendous growth and change and prosperity that's come to the developing world. Yes, it has been driven by the IT revolution, but the traditional economic development curve has been shattered, and we now see developing countries that have evolved so rapidly from resource and commodity labor-based economies, and they have actually now entered the knowledge and skill-based economies. And Dr. P's chart with the US, China, and India, and that triangle certainly underscore that. But convergence is well underway. And you can think of all the competitive high-tech industries that have emerged in countries such as Korea, the United Arab Emirates, Colombia, India, Brazil, Turkey, Mexico. And China's rapid development into a manufacturing powerhouse has been nothing short of remarkable. China, of course, has risen to #2 globally in R&D spending, behind only the United States. And China and the US are on a huge race right now of who's going to lead in high-performance computing. I had the opportunity 2 years ago to visit with a team from Lawrence Livermore, every supercomputing facility in China, massive investments going into this, linkages with their industry, developing the indigenous capability. Right now, virtually all the skilled scientists and engineers working in these facilities, without a few exceptions, have been trained in the United States at our universities and in our companies, but the race is on for this path to exascale computation, which will have, again, profound implications for industry and national security. Countries around the world are adopting innovation-based growth strategies, boosting their R&D spending, building high-tech clusters and innovation hubs. Many of you are, of course, aware of what's going on in the Gulf states. I'll just use them as an example of this. The Qatar Foundation has billions of dollars to invest. They are developing very advanced research capabilities. Yes, they have to bring in and attract the talent, but leading their science and technology strategy is my friend and colleague, Dr. Thomas Zachariah, who was the Deputy Director of Oak Ridge National Laboratory, now leading their strategy, putting together a top advisory committee of people from around the world, and they have the money and the drive and the willingness to bet on the future of innovation-based growth. And look at Brazil. President Dilma Rousseff's Science Without Borders initiative to take 20,000 Brazilian students and get them out to study in universities around the world. Thankfully, a lot of those Brazilian top students are coming to the United States, but again, Brazil has a very deep innovation strategy with higher education at the heart of that. Let's look at Saudi Arabia. I don't know how many of you are aware of who's the new president of King Abdullah University of Science and Technology. Does anybody in the room know? I'm sure Rick Bendis does. But it's a Council on Competitiveness member, Jean-Luc Chameau, Dr. Jean-Luc Chameau, who was the president of Caltech. Who would have thought that the president of Caltech is leaving one of the finest, greatest universities in the world to become the president of CAUS? So the name of the game in competition, investment, and resources in higher education has changed. And of course we now, and we were talking about this before we started, the shift to these higher skilled, intangible asset jobs, coupled to the fast, rapid deployment of autonomous systems, of self-thinking automotive systems, both in how things are made, but how they are delivered. And the software that embodies that is really changing the fact that routine tasks that can be automated, are increasingly going not to humans, but to machines. We have 24/7 global labor arbitrage. When you wake up in the morning, you go to sleep, jobs can shift around all over the world. So internet systems are providing the customers with their account information and payment processing, tax preparation. Radiologists are now using outsourced systems on the internet to read our x-rays. Computers, sensors, imaging technologies, all performing security functions once done by people. And as the cost of labor rises and the cost of automation declines, it is going to be more and more automation work, more routine work will be outsourced, and so the issue becomes, back to what Dr. P said, jobs, jobs, jobs. What will they be and who will do them? So we have a demand now, as we all know in this room, for high-end workers for jobs involving these non-routine cognitive tasks. analytical tasks, problem-solving work, complex work that varies case by case, complex communications, work that requires high levels of education, and I would add very high levels of social skills, which can be learned, social skills that are not innate to us, but that can be learned, and correlation learning. The upskilling of work is reflected in the links between educational attainment and income and the earnings gap that widened in the global economic crisis. I have a lot of statistics on this. If you're interested, you can go to some of the OECD reports on this. I'll just share one. The wage gap became more pronounced with age during the economic crisis. While a 25 to 34-year-old with a tertiary education earns about 40% more on the average than their counterpart with only a secondary education, a 55 to 64-year-old earns 73% more. So over your lifetime, the wage earning from having higher education is absolutely profound. So we could say that talent and the high skills that go with that are really the 21st century oil. And without sufficient investment in people and in the institutions that enable their education, we're going to see more and more people languish on the margins of society, and technological progress will not translate into productivity and growth. And we will see more and more of challenges both in the political and national security environments around the world, where we know so much of the tension in the world is caused because of a lack of education and a lack of jobs, particularly for young men in their 20 to 30-year-old period. And that's particularly true in the Middle East. 2 weeks ago, I had the pleasure to be with the former chairman of the Council on Competitiveness, Chad Holliday, who's now chairman of Bank of America. He was the CEO and chairman of DuPont and led our council for 5 years. But Chad and I forged back in 2010 a new entity, a new 501c3 entity called the Global Federation of Competitiveness Councils, where we have brought together the leaders of some 35 councils around the world in a new network of both sharing best practices, but also co-creating some very new thinking around competitiveness as a driver of growth. Our colleagues in Korea hosted us, and it was very interesting. The host each year for the GFCC annual meeting chooses the topic for what we call an innovation summit. And guess what the Koreans chose as their topic? Does anybody want to hazard a guess? In the whole innovation landscape, what do you think is the greatest concern the Koreans have and why they wanted to choose a topic that addresses their challenges, not their weaknesses? It wasn't 21st century manufacturing, it wasn't energy, wasn't food, water, wasn't higher technology. Nope.
Skill sets.
Coming to that, but what kind of skill set?
STEM.
Nope. Absolutely not STEM.
Entrepreneurship.
No.
Soft skills.
It was, how do we develop a capability to be imaginative and creative? They're very concerned. They've never won a Nobel Prize. They're very concerned, they do great on these STEM tests, but that is their greatest concern going forward. They don't have a culture, they don't have systems to nourish the creativity and the imagination that can build on top of these very strong STEM capabilities they have. So let me turn to higher education in the time I have left and talk about this. Also, just in terms of language we use for the economy, our economy is in a stage of turbulence, transition, and transformation, and that is certainly true in the case of higher education. The scope and depth of expertise and sophisticated skills that must be provided by higher education have grown dramatically. The diversity of people who must be served by the world's higher educational system has soared, whether measured by age, educational and cultural backgrounds, race, or gender. Higher education institutions must serve a growing number of students outside the traditional school day and school schedule and physical environment, as many adult learners hold jobs and have responsibilities competing for their time, energy, and resources. While widespread access to higher education is increasingly an economic imperative for all nations, higher education institutions are under pressure to hold the line on costs a particularly critical challenge in nations where family incomes have been stagnant, and that is certainly true in the United States. And we all know that higher education has been very slow to adjust to structural changes in the nature of work, the skills demanded in the labor market, and this expanding demographic of those in need of higher learning. There is every reason to believe that educational institutions can benefit from the management innovations, technologies, and new forms of organization that have transformed other sectors of the economy, reduced their costs, and raised productivity while expanding customer choices. If you ask most leaders of higher educational institutions, the word productivity is not a word they want to hear. We are different. The normal metrics of other economic activity don't apply to us. And of course, it's not ironic that two sectors of our economy that have almost no productivity are the ones that are under most challenge. What are they? Education and healthcare. We have seen a remarkable revolution in services delivery. Some educational enterprises may argue that this history has no bearing on the services they deliver, as I just said. But many services that have transformed other businesses of conveying knowledge and information quickly and efficiently between businesses and firms and customers are indeed relevant. And tailoring services to individual students and groups should surely be an objective in higher education, given the growing diversity of learners worldwide. So, institutions of higher education must imagine and reimagine paradigm-changing innovations and transformations in their structure and service delivery to do what? Better meet the needs of today's workers and employees, align the learning with economic and development opportunities in their regions and around the world, and very importantly, improve productivity and reduce costs. Now, of course, the ubiquitous penetration of mobile devices around the world is a very interesting platform to see how education services will be delivered. And, I know you're going to today talk about MOOCs and other aspects around big data, so I will not really address that, but to say that the whole mobile revolution is, again, going to be something that will have profound implication for education, particularly in parts of the world with huge penetration, such as China and India, where 80% of new mobile subscriptions exist. Now, the other challenge for higher education is we still have weak links between the private sector that knows and projects the skills needed for the future and future jobs, and higher educational curriculum and offerings and project-based learning. The private sector remains the strongest source of growth and jobs. In the United States, the private sector accounts for about 8 to 10 jobs and for every job created. And in the developing world, 9 out of 10 jobs are coming from the private sector. So we have to strengthen partnerships and feedback loops between educational institutions and employers. Community colleges, as we know, are doing a much better job of this than our institutions of higher education. For the past 3 years, the Council has engaged in a dialogue around what can our chief technology officers do to really accelerate these partnerships with university across just research issues, but also in how universities will deliver these services. So one of the very important findings of these CTOs, this is a group chaired by the CTO of Lockheed Martin, head of research, all global research for GE and Deere. There are about 60 members, including the vice presidents for research at universities and labs, is the following: that multidisciplinary has to be at the heart of all the curriculums for the future. There has to be a fusing of STEM with the arts, humanities, and social sciences. And one of the ways we're going to carry that forward at the Council on Competitiveness is our National Engineering Forum, where we are taking the E in STEM and blowing that out. Engineering. And actually, the theme of this conference really today should be how to re-engineer the higher educational system, because this is indeed an engineering problem. But we have to have a curriculum by design that fuses the core STEM disciplines with the arts, humanities, and the social sciences, because that is where a lot of the innovation will occur. I promised a few people in the audience that I would mention an example at the undergraduate level that I think is the most advanced in the country, I will ask anybody to give me another example that surpasses this, and that's at the U.S. Naval Academy, where every midshipman or woman gets an entire STEM, 4 years of STEM. They do not get out of there unless they are proficient in math, in electrical engineering, in all of those disciplines. They get an engineering degree. But guess what? That is just the platform to begin. They have to have a full curriculum of LRIC, language, regional expertise, culture. They have to learn critical languages. So they are producing young people that have core STEM, but all the other things. Why? Why do they need to know history? Why do they need to know philosophy? Why do they need to be in dramatics, in the arts? Why does my son, for instance, who's a new ensign on a destroyer, why did he need to minor in Arabic? Because they are training leaders that have to be able to engage in the world and be resilient and deal with complexity and the unforeseen occurring every single day. How many young people can go and get an undergraduate degree in our institutions and never take one engineering course? Most. So I throw that out as, again, a huge challenge and opportunity. We need to change the curriculums, and we need to ensure that every student that invests and goes forward has the opportunity to have a multidisciplinary skill set to actually enable them to be citizens of the world. So let me close by saying that the exciting news is that we know we have challenges in higher education. We know that higher education has been and will be the path to prosperity. We know we have challenges on how to infuse service delivery model and productivity metrics into higher education. But at the end of the day, the creation, mastery, and knowledge of science, technology, and innovation and entrepreneurship is a process that is dependent on creativity, insight, and imagination nurtured by learning. And it's actually going to be those economies and nations that embrace that new paradigm that will see their economies and societies flourish in the years to come. And I would like to close by saying, as an archaeologist who likes to study the rise and fall of civilizations and what made some great and others not, that, and my specialty is the Bronze Age, Mycenaean and Minoan world, every great culture and civilization has valued and embedded learning, the arts, imagination, and the ability to look outward, not inward, in their global success. So with that, thank you for having me. I hope this was helpful as you continue your discussions today. And Dr. P, let me just mention that the Council on Competitiveness does have a focus on higher education.